Uh, okay, so as Charlie mentioned, this discussion is unfortunately very timely. I'm not sure what's going on over there in Texas now, but whatever. This learning of Torah should be in their merit. They should have a good outcome, a safe outcome. So the topic today, a little bit different than what we did in the past. We're a little bit more maybe applicable, like taxes and some of the other sides that we did maybe more applicable. This is more worldview issues, but I think it's an interesting topic that we can to look at. And the discussion we have today is about releasing hostages. I'm going to go straight into the Torah. I just want to point out, and this is not about the understanding the political side of it, just the reality side of it, which is that countries in the world deal differently with hostages, with terrorists. And again, without going into all the details, not the point of the class, there are European countries that even if informally, which means they don't admit it as their policy, but in reality they do negotiate with the terrorists and hostages, and they pay crazy ransom money in order to release them. The stories of in Denmark in 2013, where a journalist was released from ISIS after paying after Denmark paid a ridiculous amount of ransom money. So there are countries. I don't think they admit it publicly, but I think maybe the New York Times or one of they did their background research where it was clear that this is what took place. The United States government is not only
having trouble.
Excuse me?
No.
The United States government, on the other hand, not only does it have a policy that they don't negotiate with terrorists, and again, I'm not going into whether they actually do it or not. That's not the point. The point is that they are the official law of the United States is that not only is it illegal for the government to negotiate with terrorists, with ransom in order to allow for the freedom of a hostage, but it's also illegal for individuals to do so, which means that if, let's say, a wealthy family, they want to put together the money, even that would be illegal in the United States, unless they changed the laws in the last few years. At least that's how it was. The famous story in the United States was with Jane Foley, and again, also in 2012, 2013, an American citizen that was also in as a hostage. And I believe there the family wanted to try to do something financially, but it was illegal for them to do it. That is talking about financial side, and that's something that's the primary discussion of today's class. So again, the United States law prohibits actual participation in negotiations with terrorists to release prisoners. The other countries, even if it's not the law, even if that's their policy, they actually do it. That we're going to discuss today whether that is, according to Torah, whether that's a good policy. In Israel, it's a slightly different situation where the negotiations are generally not about money. The negotiations there are about prisoner exchanges, and we'll talk about that as well. But the halacha doesn't really discuss that straight out, because in halacha we don't really have this idea that the Jews have their prisoners, and then the non-Jews have Jewish prisoners. We're going to make a prison exchange. That's not really what the discussion halacha is. Discussion halacha is what took place. Unfortunately, whether it's pirates and whatever it was that would capture a Jewish students. Hold on one second, please. Jewish people. So the primary discussion was where Jews were being taken as captives, and the question was whether you're allowed to pay to release them. We'll take it to the soldier exchange afterwards, but again, just to make it clear that in history, I think it's a little unique to our situation now in Israel, where we have a country that has their own prisoners, and so it becomes a different set of questions. But the primary discussion is going to be about monetary compensation to release a hostage. So let's begin first with a very famous story of the Maram Rothenburg. The Maram Rothenburg, Meir ben Baruch Rothenburg, is a very famous Rishonim, one of the last Rishonim. He was a big source of our halacha comes from him. He's quoted a lot in halacha, Ashkenazi halacha, a source of Ashkenaz. Hold on 1 second. Let him do what he wants. The Ashkenaz halacha is a lot of based on his a lot of his teachings, and he was under at that time. This is in the 13th century. The Jews in Germany were under a lot of intense persecution. So in 1286, the Maram decided to take his family and go to Eretz Yisrael, hopefully being able to settle there and in peace. However, when he was going through Lombardy, he was recognized by an apostate Jew who was accompanying the Archbishop of Mainz, and he outed him. And the Archbishop had Rameir arrested and taken back to Germany. And by the order of King Rudolph, he was imprisoned in Einschsheim. I'm not sure exactly where that is. And he was being held for ransom because the Jews, the king knew that the Maram Rothenburg, being the leader of the Jewish people, that the Jews would pay anything to release him. And perhaps, as we'll see later in the class, that it was not uncommon for the Jews to pay a lot of money to ransom the Jews in any case. We all, certainly those that grew up with those Machanayim blue and yellow books, we all know those Paretz stories of all the money that they would collect to release the Jews from this imprisonment. However, the Maram Rothenburg forbade the community to release him. So for 7 years, he remained in prison in the fortress. He was visited by his students. He was given the ability to write Chedushim, to write Torah, to write stuff while he was in prison, something that he continued to do. There's shuvas that we have that he wrote while he was in prison. I believe he also wrote a Sefer Torah in prison, or they brought him a Sefer Torah. I forget the details of the story, but he was, in other words, even though he was in prison, he wasn't like locked up in solitary confinement. But in any case, the bottom line is the sages forbid him. The Maram Rothenburg forbid the community from them going into freedom, to free him, to give him any money. And sure enough, he stayed there. He died in prison, and it took 14 years till they released his body to be buried. Eventually, to be buried a proper burial. So we see from this story, Maram Rothenburg was adamant that the Jews should not pay the ridiculous money that the king was asking for him. What's the reason for it? What was behind this? So the answer is that it's based on a Mishnah. This is a very straightforward Mishnah that tells us this halacha. Let's take a look at what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, "Ein poidin es hashvuyin yasar al kadei d'meim." You're not allowed to redeem you're not allowed to redeem prisoners or captives for more their actual monetary value. Why? You pray tikkun ha'olam for the betterment of the world. I just want to clarify two of the statements here. Number one, the statement that says of more than their value. What does that mean? How do we evaluate someone? So the answer to that is very simple. It doesn't mean the value that Torah puts on a person, because as we know, Torah doesn't put value on people. Where every person's life has infinite value. But it's a very practical. The halacha is talking about a very practical monetary concept here. The reason for the captivity, this works back days. It doesn't work nowadays, but back then there was a slave market. One of the primary reasons why they would take captives was to sell them on the slave market. So the Mishnah is saying that you're only allowed to pay what the slave market value is. Again, it's not relevant to our days where we don't have a slave market, thank God. But when there's a slave market, so then you're able to, based on the person's talents, based on his abilities and his strength and whatever, however else they evaluated slaves. So now this captive has a monetary value. In other words, a very practical monetary value on the market. The halacha is you're not allowed to pay more than their value, than what he would have what he would be paid on the market. In other words, you're allowed to redeem him as a slave, buy him as a slave, and then obviously let him free. You don't have to keep him as a slave. The reason for this, the Mishnah says, is because tikkun ha'olam. What does tikkun ha'olam mean? In 2022, tikkun ha'olam is a nice buzzword in many circles. But I think for the crowd that we're talking to here, we understand that the word tikkun olam is not a social justice buzzword, but tikkun olam, al pi Kabbalah, has to do with the avodas habirurim. But in halacha, tikkun olam is a very simple term that means in order that society should be able to function properly. In other words, even though halachically you can pay however much money you want, let the person pay whatever they want to get out. However, in order for there to be a functional society, the Chachamim said you cannot pay more than the value. What is the simple meaning to that? So the simple meaning for that means that if there's going to be an overpayment of the captive, it's going to cause a detriment to society. How? So the Gemara asks the question. The Gemara takes up this Mishnah, and the Gemara says, what is the issue that we're worried about? So the Chachamim asked the question, this that we say that the betterment of the world. Does that mean does that mean that it's in the concern of the increase of the community? You're going to be placing a heavy tax on the community, or is it in order that they shouldn't go ahead and seize other captives? In other words, the Gemara is asking a very simple question. The Gemara is saying, is the problem this captive? If you're going to say, let's say the slave market for this captive would have been $1,000. But these people know that the Jews are going to pay anything to get this person out. So they're really to pay $10,000. So if you're going to tell them that they have to pay $10,000 to get out, one of two things. Number one, the Gemara says, are we worried that now you're going to put a $10,000 tax on a community, which is not fair for the community? Or is the issue that the captors will say, hey, the Jews just paid $10,000. Let's go capture another Jew. And then that way, we'll make another easy $10,000. What's the difference between these two sides? What's the practical application between, why is the Gemara asking this question? What is the practical difference between these two sides of the question? So the Pashtus answer is it's a very simple difference. The simple difference would be, what if there would be an individual who's ready to pay? If someone stands up and says, here, I'll pay the $10,000. Don't make charity campaigns, don't GoFundMe, nothing. Here's the money, I'll go and pay. In which case, if the concern was the detriment to the community having to pay this heavy levy for heavy tax or whatever payment to release this person, here an individual is doing it. If the family themselves wants to pay it, whatever it is. But if the issue, if the issue was about if the issue is about the future, so then the law shouldn't allow even an individual to pay the money, because now you're telling that individual, thank you very much for saving your fellow, but right now, tomorrow there's going to be another crisis. On the other hand, if the captors see that the Jews are only going to pay this slave price, so then there's no reason for them to capture a Jew more than anyone else, because they're putting him on the slave market. Let it be on the slave market. So that's the Gemara's question here. The Gemara's question is the issue of overpaying for the hostage, if the issue is the tax that's going on right now, so then an individual should be able to pay. If the issue is not encouraging the captors to take another captive, so then we shouldn't allow even an individual to make that payment. Which feeds off to what we began in the class. That's the difference in the United States, where the law is not only about whether the government can pay in order to release a hostage from terrorists, but the law also prohibits an individual from doing so, taking into the logic what the Gemara is saying here. So the Gemara has this question. So the Gemara says we have an answer. What's the answer based on? Tashma. Let's come in here. Let's suggest an answer. The Levi Bar Darga, this fellow named Levi Bar Darga, he redeemed his daughter, was taken captive for 13,000 gold dinars. So what this is Rabbi Steinsaltz's commentary now. So this indicates that private citizens may pay excessive sums to redeem a captive if they do so. Choose. Therefore, it must be that the reason for the ordinance was to avoid an excessive burden being placed upon the community. If the ordinance was instituted to remove the incentive for kidnappers to capture Jews, a private citizen would also not be permitted to pay an excessive sum. Okay, so that's Rabbi Steinsaltz's commentary. They're bringing out the point that we just said, that the fact that Levi ben Darga that paid 13,000 gold coins, which obviously was a lot of money to redeem his daughter. So therefore, we clearly see from there that an individual is allowed to make that payment, and that the real concern is not the future. The real concern is the active role that the community, the burden that you're placing on the community to redeem the person currently. And therefore, if the private individual, like the parent, wants to pay that money, that would be allowed. Okay, so we can stop the Gemara right there. Says the Gemara, and this is a very interesting point. I think this rebuttal from Abaya is very telling a lot about Gemara in general. Anyone over here ever heard of Levi Bar Darga? You ever heard about him? I would tell you the name Abaya. Have you ever heard the name Abaya? Right, Abaya. Anyone who learns a Gemara, you know Abaya. So Abaya says, Levi ben Darga. I never heard of him. Who is he? Who is he? What's this guy did something, and all of a sudden we're going to follow his rule? Whoever said that he did it in accordance with the wishes of the sages? Maybe he did it without the wishes of the sages. So you can't bring a proof from him. It's a very important Gemara because Abai is telling us something. Not only about this Gemara, I want to take for a moment to go on a tangent here for a moment. A lot of times the Gemara brings a story, or even in Tanakh we have stories. I'm not talking about Tanakh, a story that you have about a tzaddik, about someone that did something right. Sometimes the pasuk tells us that a person, an ordinary person, okay, if the pasuk says that he was a rasha, so then obviously we don't learn from his actions. But there's people in Tanakh, ordinary people, that the Tanakh tells us something they did. The Gemara brings stories. People did things. Levi ben Darga did something. If the Gemara brings a story, if the Tanakh says a story, then that means the Gemara is telling us that this is the right way to do something. You don't say, oh, the Gemara brought a story, so what? It's a story in the Gemara. Who is he? I didn't make it into the Gemara. If they made it into the Gemara, then there's a reason why the Gemara quotes that story. Here, Abai is telling us, very nice story, Levi ben Darga, but I don't think that what he did was correct. In other words, Abai is telling us just because Levi ben Darga did it doesn't mean that it's a legitimate behavior. So again, if Abai wouldn't retort that, so then we have to take for face value. The Gemara brings a story. The Levi ben Darga did something. So if the Gemara brought that story, the Levi ben Darga did something, that means that it doesn't make a difference who Levi ben Darga is. The fact that the Gemara brings that story is an indication that he did the right thing. The Gemara teaching us that he did the right thing. Abaya comes and says no. Abaya says that this is not about the financial strain of the community now. This is a general issue that we don't want people to pay large ransom to redeem, to free people, because they're putting into danger the community for the future. The fact that Abaya doesn't continue, the Gemara doesn't continue the discussion. Abaya doesn't take it up anymore. But the fact that Abaya Like the Gemara finishes off with Abaya's rejection of, or even question that, I don't want to follow as Levi ben Darga. The Rambam and Shulchan Aruch follow Abaya's lead, and they paskin both in Rambam and Shulchan Aruch that you're not allowed to redeem a hostage, a captive, for more you're not allowed to overpay for them more than their value because of Tikkun Olam. What does that mean? They write in Shulchan Aruch, it says, in order that our enemies should not target us and attempt to take us captives. So Shulchan Aruch paskins, like the second side of the Gemara's question, the Tikkun Olam involved in not taking captives is in order to ascertain that in the future we don't come the targets of captives of captors.
Is that applicable to both private individuals and the community?
Yes. In other words, that's what the Shulchan Aruch is saying. That being that this is about not putting more people into danger in the future, it makes no difference if it's the community or individual. You're not allowed to pay a ridiculous price in order to redeem people, in order to release people from in ransom.
So does that mean, so the term you're mentioning is kidnapping and ransom. So that's something we hear about. So you're saying if somebody's kidnapped and they want to release somebody, that they're going to have to say, I'm sorry, Jewish law prohibits me. We don't have a slave market today, so I practically don't have any way to determine their worth. Like you said, if somebody was a Rebbe was kidnapped, worth beyond measure. So you're giving people a dilemma. They're worth everything. So how do you tell them you can't pay more than they're worth?
So I don't know. I don't know the answer to how we would evaluate it nowadays. What I would say is that if they're targeting the Jewish community in particular, knowing that they're going to take the Jewish people, so then that would be an issue. And again, if we're trying to see if the United States government wants to follow halacha, then you say if they're going to kidnap Americans because they know Americans are going to pay a ridiculous sum, so that would be the issue. In other words, Yosef, the point is like this: if they know they're never going to get that money, then they're not going to do it. Why are they doing it? What's the Gemara saying here? The Gemara is saying, why are they doing it? Because they know that they're going to get what they're asking for. If there is unequivocal that they're not getting it, then they would have to stop. Then they would have to stop doing that. So
eliminating.
What was that?
I'm saying so you're saying the halacha today, if somebody had a paskin today, God forbid there was a kidnapping, to discourage further kidnapping, a Jewish person is not allowed to redeem a relative from kidnappers.
1 second. This is so far. We didn't finish the class yet, by the way. So far, this is what we have. Simone's asking, so what if they're not asking about money? The logic is the same thing. In other words, it's not about whether we give money or not. If we're going to give them something ridiculous in order to redeem the person, something that will encourage them to kidnap more people in order to get that what they're asking for, whatever it is, if it's not money, if it's more prison. For example, in Israel, we said, and we'll come to this, as I said, we'll get to this later in the class, whether it's getting more prisoners released from Israel or whatever it is. So it's the same concept. We're encouraging them to continue this practice of kidnapping in order to get their requests. Then this would fall into the same, seemingly would fall into the same, in the same situation.
And was the Shulchan Aruch saying you can't pay an excessive amount or you can't pay any amount?
You can't pay an excessive amount. You can't pay anything that's going to encourage them to do it again. So that, in other words, according to Shulchan Aruch, Yosef says very clearly in Shulchan Aruch, more than their value. I think that's why Yosef Simon, it's not really relevant if we have a value of a human life today. Because as I mentioned earlier, when we learned the Mishnah, that this is not about the money, how much a value of a person is. This is a strategic concept. If you're going to pay something ridiculous, they're going to come kidnap you. So whatever it is that they're going to come take. If it's not valuable for them to do it, they're not going to do it. So it's not really about an amount of money that's put onto it. Okay, this is what we have so far. Now let's take a look at another Gemara. The Gemara in Gittin, the same Masechta actually. This was on Daf Mem Hey. Further down in the Masechta, another 13 pages later, the Gemara tells us a story. Tana Rabbanan. Ma'aser Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, the story of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya that he traveled the Krach Kollel Shabarayim to a big city in Rome. In those times, the Chachamim traveled a lot from Israel to Rome because Rome were the political control. They ruled Eretz Yisrael. And the Chachamim would go a lot to Rome to try to help the Jewish people. So they came to this big city. They told him, there's this child in prison, beautiful eyes, beautiful looking, and he has curly hair arranged in locks. So he went, Yeshua went to the entrance of the prison. And he told him, he quoted a pasuk. Who gave Yaakov for a spoil in Israel to the robbers? So the child answered, and he continued the pasuk. And he said, Hashem said, is it not who I sinned and whose ways they would not walk, neither would they be obedient to his law? So Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya saw that this is dealing with a smart boy, and he knew the pasuk. So Amar said, I'm certain that this person is going to be a halachic ruler in the Yidden. He's going to grow up to be a big pasuk. Ha'avoda. That's the way avoda is the way the Chachamim take an oath in the name of Hashem. They're taking oath in the ha'avoda, the service of the Beis Hamikdash. Ha'avoda, make an oath. I'm going to redeem him for any price. Amru. It was said about the story. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya didn't leave. He paid a lot of money for him. And sure enough, it didn't take a long time. And then eventually he became a Jewish leader. Umanu Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. He was Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, a very famous Tana, very holy Tana. I think he was a Kohen. No, I think he was a Kohen Gadol even. He was definitely Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. Was a great Tana. So obviously the question over here is, now this is not Levi ben Darga, right? Levi ben Darga, Abaye is like, who is he? Rabbi Shmuel ben Chananya, Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. These are from the greatest Tanoim. And what do we see? That he went and he paid so much money to redeem him. I don't want to go into the nuance of the story over here, how he knew he was a Talmid Chacham just from saying that pasuk. But I mean, I didn't know that pasuk. So, but assuming those days they had a better education in Tanakh, those kids. But whatever it is, they this boy knew this pasuk. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya says, we're taking him out, paying any price. So the Gemara doesn't address it. The Gemara doesn't even say 13 pages before we said something different. The Gemara leaves the story. For those that are not familiar with Gemara, this is very typical. That 13 pages later, the Gemara can bring another story that completely contradicts, and the Gemara just keeps silent. But
does this really contradict though? I mean, isn't he paying what the child was worth?
No, he said, I'm going to pay whatever they want.
Oh.
He said, I'm going to pay whatever they want, and he paid a lot of money.
But in the end, he paid what the child was worth.
No, but he made it clear that he was going to pay a lot of money. He said he's going to pay whatever. And the fact that the Gemara ends the story and he didn't leave it until he paid a lot of money. It's saying that we're emphasizing the fact that he was ready to do everything to release this child. So there's two answers that the Rishonim. Okay, so the question seems to contradict. I mean, obviously it doesn't contradict, right? The Gemara has answers that say why it doesn't contradict. But the question is, the Gemara doesn't address it. We have to look at the Rishonim. So Tosfos brings an answer. We'll take a look at two answers that Tosfos give. I'll be very upfront. Both of them aren't very very satisfying answers in the sense that I'm not sure satisfying. They're a little. We're dealing with an uncomfortable situation. If someone is in ransom, is in captivity here. So the answers take a little bit of a interesting approach here. So Tosfos answers, what does it mean for whatever amount? I did it quick. I did this right before the class. So I didn't find the Hebrew, so I'm just going to give the English over here. Tosfos says whatever amount of money that they demand. So how is he legally allowed to do this? If we already learned you're not allowed, because there was a threat to life. And we redeem captives for more than their value. And when there's a sakonis nefashos, when there's a threat to their life, then you're allowed to do that. And he brings a raya from a Gemara. So because there was a sakanas nefashis is the word that Taisus uses in the Hebrew. Because there was his life was in danger, so therefore he's allowed to go. You're allowed to pay whatever money it is in order to release it. Which means, in that case, that when Taisus is, even though the story doesn't say it, but Taisus is saying that they understood that this boy's life was in prison. Some of the Mefarshim explain that the way they understood that was because you see the Gemara that the guy described the kid. Well, how does he describe the kid? He doesn't say, "Oh, we have a Jewish kid." He says he's so good looking. So the Gemara understands that they understood from here that they were going to use him for prostitution, that they were going to sell him for prostitution. So therefore, Rabbi Shua ben Chananya understood his life was in danger. Gosh, was ruchnis, and so therefore he understood. That's what the Mefarshim say. That's what Taisus sees in the story that his life was in danger. So being that his life was in danger, he was allowed to be redeemed. Which means, by the way, going to Shana again, a great point. We're going to get to that in a minute. So in this case, the Gemara is saying, according to what Taisus is saying, that when a life is in danger, you're allowed to redeem someone. Which, if we're going to go to nowadays, ISIS, I'm pretty sure that when someone's a captive, someone is in captivity in ISIS, his life is in danger. The problem is that Ramban doesn't like this. Why does the Ramban not like this answer? The Ramban, Nachmanides, the Ramban says, not the Ramban with an M, the Ramban with an N, Nachmanides. The Ramban disagrees with Taisus. He says, I don't understand what he's saying. It doesn't even make sense what you're saying. When was the last time? He's in captive, but don't worry, he'll be okay. Which captive isn't okay? Which captive is okay? Captivity, by definition, is a life danger. In fact, he says, let's take a look at the Gemara. The Gemara in Baba Basra says, Pidyon Shvuyim Mitzvah Rabbi. Redeeming captives is a great mitzvah. How do we know that it's such a big mitzvah? He says we learn it from the pasuk. The pasuk says, it will be if they tell you, where should we depart? You should tell them, those that go for death will go for death. Those that go for the sword will to the sword. Those that go to hunger will go to hunger. Those that go to captivity will go to captivity. Rabbi Yochanan says, as the pasuk progresses, it's more severe, which means the Gemara goes on to say that sword is worse than death. Okay, go on all that, but let's go straight to the point. And captivity is worse than all of them, as it is included in all of them: famine, the sword, and death. In other words, the Gemara says that why is this the worst? Why is captivity the worst? Because it includes all of them, both famine, both the sword, those that kill you, and the death, and everything that's involved in all these hardships are all relevant when someone's in captivity. So therefore, the Gemara says that's why Pidyon Shuin is such a big mitzvah. Pidyon Shuin is such a big mitzvah because of all the life because the person's life is in danger. So if that's the case, says the Ramban, the whole reason why Pidyon Shuin, releasing the captives, is such a great mitzvah is because their life's in danger. Yet the Gemara in Gittin is saying, but that's not a point. We can't put more people's lives in danger as a result. And by giving a ridiculous sum, you're going to be putting more people's lives in danger. So therefore the Chachamim said, only you can only pay the value. But to say that when it's the life's in danger, then you could pay whatever, that doesn't make sense, says the Ramban. The way he says it is that there's those that say that you're allowed to pay more because his life was in danger. He says, it's not logical. Because kol shevi kulis nemu, because the Gemara says that by captivity, all dangers are involved. Now, Taisus might answer that there's a difference, right? The life in danger could be a relative term. There could be captors that are looking not to kill, but they're looking for the slave market. There could be captives that are looking to kill. There could be, the difference between if you are captured by ISIS or by a mafia in Mexico. In other words, ISIS might be looking for money, but they're also looking to kill. Whereas a mafia in Mexico might be just looking for their money. Again, I'm not asking which way, which was worse, but the idea is Taisus might be saying that we could there's ways of understanding this. So, however, the Ramban and Taisus, the truth is Taisus himself also said this. I went quickly, I didn't show it to you, but let's go back to Taisus. Taisus actually gives another. Alternatively, says Taisus, he was allowed to redeem the baby for more than it's worth because it possessed great wisdom. So Talmud Chacham, or like Rabbi Shua ben Hanania says, he's going to be a Meira Ira Gadol. So this goes to where what Shana Shapiro wrote on the chat here, that because he was a special person, in other words, because Rabbi Shua ben Hanania saw that it was for great benefit of the Yidden, that he should be able to be released in order to become a great sage. He was going to be a great sage. He's going to be a great sage. The benefit of the people. So therefore, he said we can break the rule and to redeem him in order for the benefit of the Talmud Chacham. So that's a little bit more of a controversial, right? How do you start measuring who's more beneficial, who's not beneficial? There are Mishnais and there are rules that the Mishnahs that give us clarification in other times of danger when we have to make decisions. This is unfortunate. Sometimes people have to make a decision between people who to save, who not to save. So there are Mishnah give us a hierarchy of benefiting society, what's considered someone who benefits the society. But clearly over here, without getting into that, just the basic idea that because he was a Talmud Chacham, he was going to be a Talmud Chacham, which also explains, right, this answer of Taisus, and the Ramban goes with this, helps us understand what Rabbi Shua ben Hanania made clear, that the reason why he's redeeming him was in order to be able to because he saw that this was the future of the Yidden, dependent on him being released. So to summarize what we've had so far, these are the primary sources that we're going to look at. To see what we have so far, we have the Gemara making it clear that under ordinary circumstances, we're not supposed to be paying great ransom. However, we do see from the Gemara that there's times that it was allowed, and we have two approaches in the Rishonim. Taisus approaches in a time of life is in danger. When the life is in immediate serious danger, then it would be allowed to pay even more. And the Ramban's approach that any captivity would be that situation, and therefore the exception would only be if it was a unique person that needed to be redeemed because of their circumstance. However, l'chura, we could say that this whole discussion is very different nowadays than what the Gemara is dealing with. In the times of Taisus, in the times of or the Gemara, what would happen? They captured, they released them, move on. Here, when we're dealing with terrorists, it's a whole different situation. What are the terrorists out to do? Especially if you give them money. What are they doing with the money? What's ISIS doing with their money? They're building hospitals. In other words, the question was, can we release them? And in those cases, there were illegal slave markets, and it was an illegal market that they were doing. What they do with their money, whatever people do with their money. Over here, we're dealing with terrorists. If we pay them, their money's going to put even more terrorism to act. And if they don't, and not only that, and if they succeed here, then what are they out to do? They're out to do more terror. So seemingly over here, it's a little bit of a different situation than then by releasing, by giving money and by negotiating, we're actually empowering them to continue terrorizing. In other words, if we look at it in the situation of the Gemara, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Let's say they pay $10,000. They capture Shmerel, they want $10,000 instead of $1,000. So you pay the $10,000 and you release Shmerel. So what's going to happen next? The Gemara is concerned they're going to go ahead and capture Berel. And then what's going to happen? You have to pay $10,000 again. So you're playing into this crazy market. And yes, every time someone is captured, there's a question of putting someone's life into danger, like we saw in the Gemara. But there's also the possibility that you're going to pay the money and everything will keep on going. Whereas by the terrorists, it's just a question of encouraging more terror, and financing terror, which would be a way of actually creating more danger to the world, putting more lives in danger actively. So therefore, there was a Rav in Tel Aviv. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Gershuni, and he actually wrote that the situation in Eretz Yisrael is very different, and even according to Tosfos, that when lives are put into danger, that you're allowed. The Tosfos says that lives are put into danger for immediate danger. You're allowed to release. He says, but you can't do it if you're putting other people's lives in danger, because there's another halacha. The halacha says that you're not allowed to put there's Altein brings Shulchan Aruch that the Altein Paskins actually in Hilchos Shabbos, the middle of Hilchos Shabbos, the Altein speaks about the Chil Shabbos, and he says you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to save someone, even if it's a doubt. However, the Altein says if there's a sakana, if you're putting your own life in danger, you're not supposed to put your own life in danger in order to save another person. To the point, the Altein Paskins, it's a machlokes harishonim, but the Altein Paskins, you're not allowed to put yourself in danger to save someone else's life, which means even though that person's certainly going to die, and you're just putting yourself into a suffix, maybe you're going to die, the Altein says still not to do it. Now, so two things. First of all, that's part of a very big, another whole discussion of whether, as an individual, whether you can do it, which leads into a Shayna's question here. Shayna's question here is, can a person volunteer to substitute themselves to release a captive? So, according to dry halacha over here, the Alter Rebbe is saying you're not allowed to put yourself in danger for someone else. A father for a son is a little bit more complicated. I remember I once gave a class a long time ago about a story in the Holocaust that involved the father and a son. And over there, it brought out that a parent and a child might be different than an individual. I don't remember offhand, so I can't. I
remember that class.
Remember that class, Ariel?
Yeah, it was exactly that. Someone who's like really connected closely, a family member, they have a right to put themselves in danger if they want to.
If they want to, right. So we did a class. I don't remember the conclusion. I have to look back. I don't remember even where it was, but we definitely did that. But it's that does put the parentheses puts a twist to the question. But according to what the Alter Rebbe is saying here, is that you're not to put life in danger. Now, we know that Chassidim always put their lives in danger to save other people, which means that we go Lefnim Meshudas Adin in this case. That's fine, okay? In other words, even though the Alter Rebbe here is passing that you're not supposed to put your life in danger, we have all the sichos about the Beis Tammuz, the Rebbe spoke about how the Rebbe went on Mesiris Nefesh, and the sichos the Rebbe brings this halacha from the Alter Rebbe and discusses how the Rebbe still went on Mesiris Nefesh to save people and why the Rebbe did it, and the Rebbe speaks in the sichos about that. But over here, it's a different situation. Over here, we're not talking about me as an individual going to save this person. We're putting. Well, in other words, we don't know who the terrorist is going to take next. We don't know where their terror is going to be. We can't put the community, we can't put the Jewish people in danger in order to save this person. Rabbi Yehuda Gershuni is saying, because ultimately, when you're by freeing a terrorist, you're creating more terror in this regard. Now, I just want to be clear two things before. First of all, there are a lot of achrayim, to go back to what we said before, there are a lot of achrayim that discuss why it would be permitted to pay a lot of money to release someone. So to go back to what Yosef Silverman asked before about, does that mean that according to halacha, if someone wants to pay a lot of money, halacha is saying no. The answer to that is yes, simple halacha saying no, unless you're going to follow like Taisus that their life is in danger, or the Ramban that or the other answer in Taisus that it's a unique situation. Generally speaking, the answer in halacha would be no. However, throughout the generations, we know that Jews paid so much money to save people. So there are achronim, the Yam Shlomo, the Marshal, there are other achronim that go through it to try to explain why it would be different. In other words, even though they're not saying that this would be the reason, but we are lenient in this. In other words, we do see in Jewish history, in all the Machanayim books, all the money that they did to save people. So therefore, I would say that what we're speaking now is a little bit more dry halacha. God forbid anyone should ever be in this situation, and like someone mentioned, unfortunately, there's people in this situation right now. But there's like in everything in halacha, and as we saw in the story with Rabbi Shmuel ben Hanania, there was wiggle room, and that we try to find the wiggle room to save a person. But I think when it comes to terrorists, there's this element Rabbi Yehuda Gershuni is bringing up is a very important element to it, which is the idea that you're actually putting many more people's lives in danger, not just to be taken captives, but that the terror that's going to kill them as a result. On the other hand, not everyone agrees. Again, this is contemporary. Rabbi Gershuni passed away in 2000. This is contemporary writings. Rabbi Vadia Yosef, who was the chief, is the Sephardic chief rabbi, one of the greatest Sephardi rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael of this last century. He actually said no. He said during the Entebbe hijacking, he wrote a whole essay saying that theoretically it would have been permissible to free them in any way. No, obviously Israel went on a counter attack to release them, but he said that there would have been a way, according to halacha, their lives were in danger, and he did think that it would be okay to pay a ransom in order to save them. So again, this question of whether nowadays that we're dealing with terrorists that are looking to kill people is debated in the contemporary opinions. There's one more element to it, relevant to Eretz Yisrael, which is the idea of the fact that it's a soldier that's being when it's a soldier that's being released in exchange for other terrorists that are being released. Over here, there is a other, again, contemporary rabbanim. One is Chaim David Halevi, who was the Sephardic chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, as well as Rav Shlomo Goren, who was the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, of the Sahal, of the old soldier, I think then of Israel also maybe. He was also chief rabbi in Eretz Yisrael. See, they say that when it comes to a soldier, there's another ingredient that has to be taken into consideration. What they're concerned is what Chaim David Halevi writes, that the issue over here is that if a soldier goes to war, this is a very common concept that is a lot brought up in Eretz Yisrael, that if a soldier goes to war and he knows that he's going to be taken captive, he may never be released, he may hesitate to do what he needs to do in war. So the need to release an Israeli soldier, or a soldier, in other words, from prison at any cost, is actually for the benefit of all of the soldiers, because otherwise you're putting all the soldiers in danger, you're putting the whole country in danger, because you're losing the morale of the the soldiers. So this was an after fact. It was after one of the big prison exchanges in 1985. Israel released 1,150 prisoners for 3 Israeli soldiers. It turned out that some of them were big terrorists, and so it was a big uproar. And so he wrote after the fact. He wrote that he thinks that what the Israeli government did was legitimate. In fact, the way he put it was, he says, who says we're going to be raising the morale of the terrorists by releasing so many terrorists? Maybe we're raising the morale of the Israeli soldiers, that when they go to war, they'll fight better. So therefore, he was of the opinion that it was actually it was a good idea to do that. Rav Shlomo Goren also came to that conclusion, but he came from a different angle, and he said that the reason why the government has an obligation to release them at any cost is because they went as the shluchim of the country. They were sent by the country to war. So the country has a obligation to free them at any cost. The whole Gemara is talking about a guy gets taken captivity. What's my obligation? But if you sent the person into danger, then you have to do whatever you can to have him released. So if Shlomo Goren came from the other angle, that an Israeli soldier has another reason to release them. So to summarize what we have, again, before we'll go to the Rebbe's position in a minute, but Rebbe's position is not from halacha, it's coming from a different angle. So I just wanted to summarize the halacha that we had from. We had from the Mishnah very clearly that you're not supposed to pay high ransom. The Gemara made it clear. Shulchan Aruch, the way the Gemara accepts the Shulchan Aruch accepts the conclusion of the Gemara is, the Gemara made it clear that the reason is because you don't want to encourage future captives as a result of the high ransom. However, we saw in the story of Rabbi Yishua bar Hanania that there was a time that he did pay a high ransom, and so Tosfos says that if the person's life is in immediate danger, you're allowed to pay even a high ransom. The Ramban disagreed. He says every captivity can be considered a life in danger, as we saw the Gemara Baba Basra, and therefore he says that he goes with the second answer of Tosfos, that if it's a unique situation, that the person is an important figure, in such a circumstance, we can pay whatever it is to release them. How does that apply nowadays? So we brought in the other element that there is something else to take into consideration nowadays, as we saw from Yehuda Gershuni, that nowadays we're not looking at captives, people that were trying to make money. It wasn't in the times that the Gemara was talking about, it was more of a monetary market that the Chachamim were dealing with. So even though people's lives are being put into danger by being taken captives, but ultimately it was really about a economic issue that was going on there. Whereas nowadays we're dealing with terrorists, and we're dealing with terrorists by paying high ransom, even when a person's life's in danger. We seem to be putting more people's lives in danger as a result, because of whether financially they're using the finances for terrorism, encourage them to do more terror, and so on. When it comes to an Israeli soldier, we saw that some of the contemporary Rabbanim saying, again, not everyone agreed with that. Rabbi Yosef held that even nowadays, you would be allowed, when people's lives are in danger, you would be allowed to pay a higher ransom. When it comes to Israeli soldiers and releasing prisoners and prisoner exchanges, here we had another angle that the contemporary Rabbanim put to it, which was that by showing the soldiers that you'll do anything to release them, you're going to raise the morale of the Israeli soldiers, which will then allow them to do their job properly. And so therefore it's worthwhile in order to be able to make sure that these soldiers will do what they need. And Rabbi Goren's approach was that being that the soldiers were going as emissaries from the country, so therefore the country has an obligation to redeem them, irrelevant to the Tikkun Olam issue. So just want to conclude with the Rebbe, what the Rebbe spoke about in the time in 1979, I think was the first, one of the first big Israeli prisoner exchange. And it was a very big outrage. It was done in secrecy. Not the entire cabinet did it. There was a very slim majority. And the Rebbe spoke about it on by the Fabrengen. And the Rebbe said that the fact that his life was in danger makes it a halachic debate whether it was right or not. And also the Rebbe said it's a halachic debate. The Rebbe didn't want to wade into the halachic debate. He says, that's a machlekes. What the Rebbe did do is, the Rebbe did criticize the Israeli government and says that why are you negotiating with terrorists? In other words, the approach that they went to negotiate with the terrorists was like giving in and showing capitulating to the terrorism. You know, the Rebbe didn't say it's not pshat. The Rebbe said it's not pshat. Oh, you went to ask a shayla, are we doing the right thing? Should we go negotiate? Till now, you stood firm. You don't negotiate with terrorists, and you show the terrorists that you're being firm. All of a sudden, now you decided to bend and to go to see what the Israeli policy. Knows that Rebbe felt that what was happening here wasn't coming from a strong opinion or a strong stolz in what they were coming to fight to get their soldiers. The Rebbe felt that their approach to go to the terrorists were to almost like bow to the terrorists and to give them out. And that the Rebbe was very upset about. In other words, that even when according to halacha, there's place to go ahead and negotiate and to release the prisons, it has to be done coming with, this is what Torah says to us to do. This is what we're doing out of strength, not out of a weakness to try to, what can we do in order to save face, or rather to come with the starkheit, whatever we do, whether Allah says to negotiate or not to negotiate, whatever it is, we have to always come with the starkheit of Yiddishkeit and the starkheit of halacha and Neivishter to come and show that this firmness is what's going to eventually bring the salvations. Neivishter should help. First of all, for those that the situation in Texas that are learning Torah today on the subject should be for their schus, that they should be quickly released in good health. And in general, we have the Yidden in Golus. We're all in Golus, and Golus is definitely Sakanas Nefashis, if not Begashmi, is certainly Beruchnius. And so therefore, certainly according to Taisus, the Eibishter has an obligation to pay whatever it takes for him to take us out of Golus in order to get us out of the Sakanas Nefashis.
Amen.
Great season. Thank you for joining us over these 4 weeks. I look forward to maybe next year getting back into it.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi
you.
Altein. It's been wonderful, all sessions, very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Illuminating, making our Motzei Shabbos is very interesting, illuminating, and showing how giving us insights into not only the issues on modern topics, but also how the Gemara is and the other Chachamim have looked at these subjects and how it's relevant to today.
Yes.
And I would like to add that tonight's session was most captivating.
Yes, it. I went 4 weeks without one. Okay, Charlie, you got to come back with one.
Save it to the
Yeah,
end.
right. Okay. Shukala.
Okay,
Thank you.